You know, living the Christian life is really one of the most challenging things I have ever done in my entire life. And it's not because it's hard to be good, it's because we have an enemy. The Bible is very clear, and Jesus was very clear, that there are two kingdoms at war, the kingdom of darkness and the kingdom of light. Jesus is the Lord of the kingdom of light. Satan is the Lord of the kingdom of darkness. And he said these two kingdoms will fight until the bitter end. They will never agree on anything, never. When a person gets born again of God's Spirit, there's a line that you cross, a spiritual line you cross. And in that line, you become an enemy of Satan. Before that, you're not an enemy. You're an enemy of God. Paul was very clear about that. He said, when we were enemies, God gave us grace. God sent his Son to die for us, to redeem us and restore us back to his kingdom. When I was 17, my last video I shared with you that I came to a faith in Jesus Christ. And that God did this work in me that I didn't anticipate, I didn't look for or anything. He just showed up one day. I was crying out to him to know him. He showed up on June 5th, 1975, and started a work in me that culminated about 6 or 7 hours later, around 4 o'clock in the morning on June 6, 1975. When that happened, I was born of God's Spirit, I was filled with God's Spirit, and I was a marked man. The demonic realm, the kingdom of darkness, marked me as someone that was now its enemy. And I had no clue about that. And I had told you in an earlier testimony, when I was being drawn to God, that I worked in a restaurant where there were some Christians and some witches and the rest of us. Well, there was a real battle going on. And when I came to Christ, I was really fired up. And I was telling everybody about what God had done in my life and how wonderful he was to me, how he delivered me from drugs and delivered me from cigarettes and so on. And I didn't realize that I was entering into a war, entering into a battle. And as time went on, over the first 3 months of my new life, I encountered spiritual warfare. I encountered demonic spirits trying to come against me and trying to thwart the work of God through me. And they came at me in different ways. It's really hard to explain that if you've not been a Christian, if you've not experienced it. It's really kind of hard to explain how that works. But one of the ways in which the enemy would attack me was just trying to get me angry, trying to get me just fed up. And one night I went to work and I was just feeling this angst, and it was spiritual warfare. It was the enemy coming against me and trying to get me to abandon my faith. And as the evening wore on, I was just feeling more and more edgy. And at some point in my working night there, I noticed that the coffee pot that we had was overflowing the filter. And I walked over, and the way this worked is we'd put a cloth filter in, put the coffee in, and we would slide this thing into the top part of the coffee maker, start it. The coffee, the water would come in, just like any coffee pot, and drip into the pot. Well, it wasn't dripping into the pot, it was flowing over. And I walked over without even thinking about it. I saw it doing that, and I grabbed a hold of it and I jerked it off to put it in the trash can, and I didn't realize it was full of coffee. And when I jerked it off, it just drenched my arm with coffee. And oh man, I was just like, whoa! And I threw it down on the floor, and I was like, I've had it, and I went and bought a pack of cigarettes. I don't know why I did that, but I was just like, I've had enough of this angst kind of stuff. And I went and bought a pack of cigarettes, went outside, lit one up, started smoking a cigarette. And that was the beginning of my falling away from God for a while, for about 10 years of my life. And I went back to the lifestyle I had before. It didn't take long, a month or so, and I was back to doing drugs and living stupid and everything. And I stayed that way for a long time. And so on. And I started learning how to play music because I like music and everything. But, in my heart, in my innermost being, I knew God was real. I had encountered him, and I was absolutely sure he was real. I knew I wasn't living for him, but I had kind of walked away from living for him, for my faith. Well, I learned to play music, and through some relationships that I had, I started getting exposed to people that were in the occult and so on, and witchcraft and different things. This was outside of the restaurant. This was, as time went on, and people started giving me books on the occult, and I started reading that stuff and everything. And I had a friend came over to my home one night. They were going out to Wright State University to listen to John Muncie give a seminar on rock music and the involvement in the occult by a lot of rock musicians and backmasking and all this stuff. And so they said, hey, you want to go out there and check this out with us? And just on a whim, I said, yeah. So I went out to Wright State with them, and we were in this huge auditorium, seated, I don't know, 500, 600, 700 people or something like that. And we were sitting in the very top in the back row. And we listened to John Muncie give this presentation. And the whole time I was just feeling the conviction of the Holy Spirit. And what was interesting to me was that about a year prior to this, right, I really hadn't met that many people in the occult and stuff, but about a year prior to this, I had an experience where I knew that I had crossed a line in the sand, a spiritual line in the sand. And I sensed that God was withdrawing his presence away from me. It was kind of like him saying, if you want this other life, I'll let you go. It's kind of like, when you have a relationship with someone and it's good and you're devoted to one another, and then the other person starts just not being devoted anymore, and you hang in there and you hang in there, and then finally you reach a place where it's like, I'm going to let go. And that's what God did with me, was he let go. And when I crossed this line in the sand, I had a Jehovah's Witness start coming around once a week, and we were talking about life and different things. And I started meeting other musicians that were into the occult. One guy that I was doing some writing some music with, he was living with a woman who was a witch and different things. And there was just some really weird stuff happening in my life at that time during that year. And it turned out it was the further the year went along, it was becoming the worst year of my life. I mean, life was just becoming harder. Life was becoming less satisfying, and so on. And I remember, toward the end of that year, my spirit, in my heart of hearts, I was just crying out to God, get me out of here. Just get me out of here. And then Greg, this neighbor, a friend of some neighbors, he came over and said, hey, you want to go hear John Muncie talk about this stuff? And so I went out there. And when John Muncie got done, he gave an altar call, or asked people that wanted to get right with God to come down to the front and pray and so on. And I just really felt the Holy Spirit just convicting me. And I just knew I needed to go down. And something inside of me didn't want to. And I started pacing back and forth between the back of this. I was in the last row of chairs at the top of this auditorium, and I was between those chairs and the wall, just pacing back and forth and just wrestling with this. And finally I felt like, I've really just, I don't know. And then finally the Spirit of God just spoke to my heart and said, you can't get unborn. Why don't you come home? Why don't you just come home? And it just made perfect sense. And I just let it go. And I walked down to the front, dropped to my knees and started praying, asking God to forgive me and make things right. And someone came over and laid hands on me and started praying for me. And I threw my cigarettes away in a trash can and everything. And I went home. And I had a song that I had recorded on my 4-track. Now, I didn't have the 4-track anymore, but I still had the master tape. And the way the 4-track worked was it recorded across the whole face of the tape in one direction. Most cassette players do half of the tape one direction, half the tape the other direction. And recorded the music, bounced it down to a couple tracks, and then recorded some vocals. And the day that I recorded the vocals, not being a vocalist or anything, I was making mistakes, and I had written these lyrics where I was trying to depict, a child sitting with a can. You know, you've seen pictures for Compassion International or some Feed the Kids organization where the little kids got the cup and they're just in black and white and they're just like, can you give me a quarter or a dime or something? And I had this imagery in my head, and so I penned these lyrics that said, walking down a dusty road that swirled around my feet, there was a pair of dark eyes I chanced to meet. I could feel them reaching out, feel them touching me. Then the child said, "Mister, please." And I was just depicting this little kid with a cup, and you're in a third world country, and the dust is blowing around as you're walking and stuff like that. Well, as I sang the lyrics, I would make mistakes, and I would go back and re-sing, you know, or something. And I thought, you know, after 4 or 5 times, I thought, you know what, I'm going to stop redoing it, and I'll just go back and punch in the correct stuff. But as I made mistakes, I would listen back to it, and I noticed that, you know, some of the mistakes just seemed to fit, right? They were a change, but they seemed to fit. Like the first thing that changed was, you know, the first line where it says, walking down a dusty road that swirled around my feet. Well, it changed to walking down a dusty road that swirled around the beat, right? And I thought, well, that kind of fits. It's a song, you know, it's got a beat and stuff. And so over 5 or 6 hours of trying to record these lyrics, I kept making mistakes. I kept liking the mistake until the lyrics had totally radically changed. And what they read after they had changed was, gazed into a crystal ball, it swirled round the beat. I could feel the presence coming after me. I could feel the darkness enveloping my soul. I could hear the voices talking to me from below. And all of that was true. You know, it's uncanny how those things just changed. And I didn't intentionally pen those that way, but that's what they became. Well, when I came home from this John Muncie seminar, I wondered, you know, was there backmasking in this? And so I put the tape into my cassette player, and it turns out the vocals was the part that played backwards, right? Which is what backmasking is, when you played music backwards, like on an album, I think it was by ELO. They had at the beginning of this album side, and recorded backwards, it said, music is reversible, time is not, turn back, turn back, turn back. Well, when you listen to it, you know, normally it sounded weird and stuff, but if you spun the turntable backward, you would find it, you would hear that. Well, I played this stuff backward, and there was one spot where it said, "Oh, you must save yourself." Another spot said, "You must save yourself only. I am the beast, save yourself only." And it freaked me out. And as soon as I listened to that, I could feel this presence behind me. And I couldn't get it to be in front of me. I wanted to face it. I wanted to confront it. And I was spinning around in my living room just trying to confront this spirit. And it always stayed behind me. I could never get it to be in front of me. And it freaked me out. It scared me. And to the degree that I decided to go to bed. I went to bed clutching and holding a Bible to my chest and praying for God to deliver me, to get me out of whatever I'd gotten myself into, right? And a friend that I'd been doing this music with, that had the wife that was a witch, or the girlfriend that he was living with, came and knocked on my front door. And all my lights were out, and he knocked and knocked for like 15, 20 minutes straight, just did not stop. And finally I got tired of the knock and got up, went and opened up the door, and he just walked right in my house and sat down, and I said, "Dude," I said, "I'm in bed." And he goes, "No, don't worry about it," right? And everything, and I was just disturbed by this and everything, and I said, "Man," I said, "I've had a really weird experience tonight." And he's like, "Man, let's smoke some pot." And it's like, "No, I don't want to get high, you know." And I said, "Listen to this." And I started to play the song backward, and he kept turning it off. He goes, "No, don't listen to that. Don't listen to that." And then at some point, I couldn't sense this presence behind me anymore. But then he started telling me personal things about myself, things that nobody knew, that I knew were true. And it's like, he doesn't have any way to know this stuff. And I really began to wonder if this spirit had, you know, attached itself to him rather than me. And he just stayed for a couple hours, couldn't get him to leave. And finally, I just got so frustrated with him. I dug half a cigarette butt out of an ashtray, lit it up, and as soon as I lit that up, he said, "See you." And he got up and he walked out the door. And this was the beginning of my coming home, coming back to Christ. And slowly, over a couple years period, I lost the desire to be a part of the lifestyle that I had been living. I smoked pot, I hung out with musicians, I got drunk a lot, just living crazy, doing stupid stuff. And I remember, like specifically, one night I was out of pot, and I went over to a friend's house who sold pot, and he was watching Blue Lagoon with his girlfriend. She was totally into it. I was just like, whatever, and stuff. But he was there, and his friend was there that sold pot, and they fired up a joint. And I started smoking this joint with them, and it's like I realized I didn't just become something more. I just became something less. And all this desire to smoke pot just went, and it was gone. And it's like, I don't need this. I don't want this. And I walked away from it. And I had a friend, not long after I went to the John Muncie seminar, I had a friend who had, and actually it was before that, it was in December. The John Muncie thing was, I think, in February of 1984. But a friend of mine who had gotten saved invited me to come over and talk with him. In fact, it was kind of funny. He started telling me that he had gotten saved, and we had partied. We had done acid and all kinds of drugs together, got blind drunk and stuff. Should have killed ourselves, died, some of the stupid stuff we did, but he invited me over for dinner, and he shared with me that he had been saved. And I said, well, I got saved when I was 17, and he just like, what? He's like, you? He says, dude, I have partied with you the last 10 years. And I'm like, well, yeah, I kind of haven't lived the life, but I got saved. I know for sure that God is real and everything. And he invited his pastor to come over, and we talked and we prayed and stuff. And then after the John Muncie thing, I just started going to church where he went to church, and started the path back to relationship with God. And the first time I read through the Old Testament, cover to cover, I realized what God had done in my life. If you read the story of the Israelites through Exodus and Deuteronomy and Joshua and Judges and so on, you see this pattern with them where they'd be right with God, right? If you started at the top of a circle, everything is correct and they're in a good relationship with God. And then slowly over time, they begin to intermingle with other cultures, and then they begin to intermarry with other cultures, and then they begin to worship with other cultures, and then they begin to stop worshiping their God and they worship the gods of these other cultures, and then they go into bondage to whatever, and then they cry out to God for deliverance from the bondage, and then God would raise up somebody like Samson or Deborah or different folks, and Gideon, and then God would deliver them from that bondage, and they'd be back in a good place, and then they would cycle down through that again. And if you look at their history, they kind of did this through their history. And as I was, and then they reached a place where he said, okay, blessings are not going to draw your heart back to me, so I'm going to withdraw my presence, withdraw my blessings, withdraw everything relationally with you. I'm going to let you go. And that's what God did with me. When I said I crossed that line, and that spiritual line in the sand, that's what God did with me. He just let go. And he let me have the things I was pursuing, and he let the things I was pursuing have me. And I went into bondage, spiritual darkness. And then my heart cried out, God, get me out of here. Then I got invited to a seminar, and then God said, come home. Just come home. So, what's the point of the story? Why am I sharing this with you? First is I want you to know that God is real, and he did not stop working in my life simply because I stopped living for him. I was stupid. I was absolutely stupid. But God said, you know what? I understand your heart. I understand why you're doing everything you're doing, and I'm not giving up on you. I have covenant with you. If you don't understand the covenant of Christianity that God has with Christians, you need to study that. If you're a believer, you need to study covenant to really understand what that is. But God had a covenant relationship with me, and he wasn't going to let go. Right? Even though when he backed off, he didn't let go. He just backed off and waited for my heart to cry out for him. And then he responded. And he drew me back, and he began working in my life again. And delivering me again. He didn't deliver me instantly like he did when I was first born again, but he began slowly to deliver me. He took away the pleasure. He took away the desire for many things. And the last thing I let go of was cigarettes. And man, I tried for 2 years to quit, and I just couldn't. And finally, one day I was sitting in a garage working on some heavy farming stuff with my brother-in-law, and he went in the house, and there was a wood burning stove, and it was wintertime. We had this fire going, and I opened it up and just threw the cigarettes in one at a time, repented, rebuked Satan and stuff. And then for 3 days, my lungs physically ached for a cigarette. My lungs wanted a cigarette so bad. And God gave me grace. And after 3 days, like a switch got flipped, and I was delivered again. I was set free from that. So the point of all of this is that you will know that God is real. That you will know that he didn't give up on me. That you will know that he delivered me, that he blessed me, that he called me back and drew my heart back to him. I have this permanent relationship with him. I have this covenant relationship. He is faithful to me even when I'm not faithful to him, because he is one who is faithful. It's his nature to be faithful. And so I'm sharing this with you so that you'll know, if you're in a similar situation, you've known God, and for whatever reason you've decided to stop walking with him or living for him, he hasn't stopped pursuing you. He hasn't stopped desiring you. He hasn't stopped wanting to bless your life. And he's saying to you, come home. Just come home. This is John Pearson with Before Eternity. I hope this has been something that has touched your heart. If you're a believer and you think that this is something folks that you know need to hear, share it on your social media. Just click the button down below. And then I want to challenge you or encourage you or counsel you to go and bless God and bless others. In the name of Jesus, amen.